social distancing, you say? The future is watching. Welcome to Opcode Virtual Summit.
Well, who wants to start the conversation? Sarah, Brian, Grugq? Which
I always defer to Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, you by default.
Okay, so
yeah, I suppose we better get the elephant out of the room first. Let's have the fight about what disinformation is.
I think we should open with what we're going to be covering.
Oh, okay.
And then
go on, Jake, you do it.
Yeah. Fine. Okay, so the panel is called Disinformation About Disinformation. And essentially what we want to do is we want to broaden people's understanding of what disinformation is, because it seems quite a lot of the attention these days is focused on things like Twitter bots or Facebook pages. And there's really just a huge amount out there that is sort of much more important in terms of actually driving how people perceive the world. So we're going to be covering how misinformation and disinformation are not a limited phenomenon exclusive to Russia or China, and that a huge amount of disinformation does not even touch social media, that it actually comes from authorities, celebrities, and the media. So,
and corporations.
We'll start up, and corporations. So we will start out by beating up on Brian about the definition of misinformation.
Sorry, welcome to our virtual sitting room where we just have a chat about things between ourselves.
Yeah.
So
Sarah?
Yeah, the discussion we generally have is, there are whole committees dedicated to defining what disinformation and misinformation are. I spent half my life avoiding being on those committees. So generally what we do is we just say, okay, here's a working definition. There it is. Now we go do the shit we need to do. So what we've done typically is said that misinformation is false content, whether it's text or images, it's information of some form. That's false. It's not necessarily malicious. It might be my grandmother not knowing what my favorite color is. It's people innocently passing on stuff that they don't know is false. Whereas disinformation has two parts to it. It's a sense of intent that it's deliberately put out to be false, but that also it's beyond just the content. It's the falsehood may not be in the content at all. You can have a disinformation campaign with completely true information. We've seen a lot of disinformation campaigns focused on African Americans and Black communities in other countries, where the information presented is completely true. It's just amplified. The amplification itself is false. The groups that are set up are false. The users who are pushing out that information are false. So falsehoods are elsewhere in the production chains. That's where I come from on disinformation, misinformation. Yaga, your turn.
And we're similar on that. To me, and what I've always, the way I always define misinformation is falsehood, but it is completely unmalicious. So if your mother says something wrong because she read it someplace else, that's spreading misinformation. Disinformation is the originator of it and what their intent is. So that's where I really put it, is the disinformation is in the intent part more than anything else. Whereas the misinformation, hey, I just picked it up and I keep running with it. Even until somebody tells me it's wrong. And then if I still keep running with it, now I'm part of the problem as well.
Yeah, that's fair. I think we actually just violently agreed. We've obviously been arguing about this enough now.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that everyone's on board, essentially disinformation is malicious with intent, and misinformation is just being wrong, intentionally or not. That's like, oh, what else?
Well,
Let's
let me
not
hop
talk
in
about
for, let me
what
hop
people
in
do.
one thing. One thing that Sarah said, I think is absolutely right. And a lot of people don't understand this. A good disinformation campaign is 95% truth. A great disinformation campaign is completely true. And I've just changed up how the context is so that it is, you don't realize that. And you can even go verify that it's the truth, which reinforces the fact that, oh, I should believe this.
I mean, really, good disinformation campaigns are just really good advertising.
Yeah.
Marketing methods applied. Yes. That's why we used marketing models originally in the AMIT frameworks. That's why we fed them in. Sorry, G, your turn.
No, I was just going to say, like, if you look at pretty much anyone who's put together laws of propaganda, they will almost always say, do not lie. Like, if you can avoid it, do not lie, and never lie by accident. You know, the more truth you have, the better. So, you know, from Goebbels saying, you know, do not lie, to the British propaganda committees saying, you know, we will use the truth exclusively unless, you know, it's to our benefit to not do that. Even black propaganda was almost exclusively truth-based. It's far more powerful to give someone the truth, even if it's just a subset. That's usually a very good way of doing it, is to just a partial truth is sufficient. And then as long as you frame it the right way, it can carry over literally everything you want. Like,
if you think about things like cheap fakes versus deep fakes, I mean, it's, you know, quite often a cheap fake, just using a real video and messing with it is more effective than taking the time to build something.
Yeah, just to build on Ryan's point, I've written about this extensively. So the thing I want to move on to is, like, right now, I don't know if anyone's noticed, but we're kind of in this pandemic time. And one of the things that happens during a pandemic is my dog goes crazy and tries to break into my room. But the other thing is, like, because pandemics are, on the one hand, they're sort of starved for news, and on the other hand, they're full of bad news. So they become a very fertile environment for rumors, because pretty much, you know, everyone likes to feel that they know something and they can share something new with other people. So it makes rumors spread very well. And in a time of widespread fear, there's, you know, a lot of space for people to come up with things that are, you know, they're terrifying, or they sound good, or so on. So the thing I wanted to bring up here is how are rumors about COVID going around? Like, we've got that huge list, Sarah, that
yeah, we've got a few lists now.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing we've been doing is Cogs at CoLab have been collating all of the other lists of COVID-19 narratives. So narratives are the stories that people tell. I guess we've got to explain that bit too. So what we tend to see is campaigns. So you see these large scale events, or these large scale things that are being pushed. MH19, there are lots of disinformation instances around that. So you see a campaign with instance within it. COVID-19, there are lots of smaller instances within that. And most of the instances have some form of narrative. some form of story, some form of meme that they sit on. So, and those memes underneath that, then you see the messages, you see the fake users, you see the fake linkages, you see the fake groups, all the things that you see as I'm a data scientist, so I see as a data scientist. But if you want to start dealing with these, you need to start tracking at the narrative level. So we've been collecting up lists of narratives, and some of them are pretty wonderfully crazy. There's lots of sort of China narratives, there's lots of health narratives. One of the reasons that you get these is because there are information vacuums. So where there isn't good, reliable information at the top in a country, or there isn't a trusted source or set of trusted sources, then the bad guys will just step into that, throw data in. Either geopolitical aims, money aims. Let me go hunt some of these down whilst we talk amongst ourselves. Yeah.
So like one point I had is that like basically China and Russia have not killed anyone with disinformation, but Trump has. His big thing on chloroquine led to at least 2 people ingesting like basically a compound meant for fish, not for human consumption. And it was a husband and wife. The husband died and the wife ended up basically being in ICU, saying, don't trust anyone, not even the president, which, to be fair, seems like something that you would have figured out in 2016, but here we are. So, like disinformation, and I'm going to class that as disinformation rather than misinformation, because I don't think he does anything that isn't malicious. Like disinformation can come from anywhere. And right now, a lot of it is coming from the top. Like it is coming from media sources or from companies or from politicians, and that makes it particularly insidious because it's very hard to push back against. Like if it was just Twitter bots, it would be easy. We could deplatform the Twitter bots. But when you have governors saying that they don't really need to do anything because they don't really believe that COVID-19 is a threat, it's much, much harder to counter that.
Well, there've been long-running pipelines as well. So we've been watching for years now, stuff starting up in the channels, moving through into the mainstream media, and then straight through the top levels back to public. So there are whole flows here to be dealt with. It's not just like a simple take out the bots and you're good.
Right.
But I guess this is the point of our discussion, really.
Well, and as we talked about before this, yes, there is sources of disinformation, misinformation coming from, say, New York Times. We talked about that. But like I said, where do we expect them to step up and actually say these people are wrong? It's very hard for one entity that's the size of New York Times to flat out say the president is wrong, don't follow him, follow us, because it could very easily be looked at as now I'm going to be a source of misinformation or disinformation.
Yeah, I mean, the politics of it is hard. And then you have and now I find the truth. And we're seeing more groups. So the WHO has its own list of rumors and counters and true facts. But there are groups that have run through disasters for quite a long time. So FEMA's run way back, hurricane lists of rumors. BuzzFeed has done this for a long time. Now we're seeing the big orgs like WHO. We're seeing, I think Maryland just stood up an information bureau. So we're starting to see that state level coming back. I don't know if we're going to get to a decent information bureau for the for the US, but this isn't just a US problem. We're dealing with information vacuums and a bunch of bad guys trying to lever into those vacuums at the same time.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was going to say is you've brought up WHO, and right now they've had a little bit of a credibility problem this year because they have made some possibly honest errors, but also the things like where they have erased Taiwan, first ignoring the warning of human-to-human transmission, and then the fairly famous video of the WHO representative basically pretending that they didn't hear a question about Taiwan and then logging off and so on. So they're struggling a little bit with credibility, and I believe it was, well, for me it was earlier today, but I think in the US it was yesterday, Trump has now started to directly attack WHO, which is going to cause, I would suspect, that's his overt message to the various amplification channels to start generating their own, what did WHO know and when did they know it? How corrupt are WHO? All of these other conspiracies and so on are going to be generated out of people taking their cue from that. And it's going to have a knock-on effect just because that's how the information world works. If you create enough smoke, people suspect that there must be some fire somewhere.
I think the truth is, the truth has always been a casualty of politics. And it's, political spin has existed as long as I guess we've had humans.
Well, and that's why, our topic is disinformation isn't just all these other big sources. And what I try to focus on more is local disinformation, and a lot of what we say at like local levels. Take a look at local political campaigns, and this is across the world. What we call mudslinging are lies. But we just get into this habit of people going, oh, I understand what that is. But what it does is it makes you more susceptible to other types. You get used to that, and you just start believing it is okay to do this. Or if it's your cause, your politician, your whatever, you think it is okay to do that as long as it meets your needs.
But you also get societies where caveat emptor holds. You don't get, where I come from, I'm obviously not American. We have the Advertising Standards Association. There's actually a body set up to keep advertisers truthful. I'm not really seeing an equivalent here. So how do you expect truthfulness to happen in a society where that isn't an expectation in the first place?
Well, the problem there is Americans are really big on the First Amendment. And so, to be fair, yes, free speech, absolutely a great thing. But that's a very broad, general, principle. And when it gets down to like the nuts and bolts, and it means things like free speech means that you're allowed to lie about things. Okay, that's fair. But, we do actually have rules about stuff. Like you're not allowed to lie that this mercury-based drink is going to cure all of your problems, therefore drink mercury. Like if you tried to advertise that, you would be shut down very hard. You're not allowed to sell quack medicines. You are limited in things like what you can claim about foods. Right? So you can't say like this is a fat-free food if it's actually full of fat. Like, you have free speech, but there are rules. So it would be entirely possible to put rules in place that say like if you are advertising something, not just that people eat, but like if you're advertising things, you're not really allowed to lie. Like you're only allowed to lie a little bit.
Well, one of the baseline lies is this product will make you sexy. You know, it's,
Well, no, and that's the truth. And this is something, not just the U.S. This is worldwide. We have become used to advertising, and that it also makes us very susceptible, in my opinion, to these disinformation and misinformation, because every bit of advertising at a certain level is a little bit of misinformation.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that's related to that is if you look at now there's a lot of companies that are being set up to do disinformation and misinformation campaigns. It's been commercialized, like it's not just the IRA, there's a whole bunch of entities. And when you look at them, like they're run by PR people, they're run by ad people, they're run by the experts in, marketing lies to people.
isn't that the roots of the IRA too? I mean, that started as commercial.
Yeah.
Well, you definitely made a point I was going to, and that's that you can take a look at a lot of the masterminds behind campaigns going on right now, and they are PR people, advertising people, because they understand they understand how to get people's attention and keep it focused on their message.
Well, you're also talking, I mean, it's not just focus on message, but you're in-group, out-grouping as well. So some of this, again, is about this narrative. Some of the narratives that people have are the stories about who you are and who you belong to, and also who you don't belong to. So a lot of the interesting campaigns have been the ones that have been creating splits and creating chaos. It's not even about getting people to believe stuff. It's just about getting them to not like the guy over there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And before we go into splitting groups, which I'd love to talk about, I just want to bring up that actually a very fascinating look at how, I'm sorry, I just read the line that someone put in the note that said BJ in intensive care. And I thought that's a brilliant idea until I realized it means Boris Johnson.
Yeah, Prime Minister, England. Yes, is.
Yes. Okay. Sorry.
I know what you were thinking, Grugq.
I think everyone does.
Yeah, you can take the guy out of the brothel. Anyway.
Look, so one of the fascinating things is that actually, like, the reason that Fox News and the sort of extreme right-wing media machine exists is that during the 80s, there was this move of identity politics that Rush Limbaugh basically started with his AM talk radio show. And that brought together like Christians, like Southern racists, and some other right-wing conservative groups. And that suddenly actually created a advertising market, right? Like previously you'd have to have a different way of marketing to those separate groups. But now from a advertising point of view, they were all collected in one place. So they were easier to target with marketing and ads. And that created, that put money into the space, and therefore more people got in. There was a need for more people to do this. And most of it started out not necessarily as right-wing perspectives of, let's do deep policy analysis of how we can reduce government to improve, efficiency and blah, blah, blah. It was identity politics, right? They're creating like, this is our identity. And that has increased over time. So it has become very much an identity statement. And that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been a corresponding left-wing media empire, because you already have an identity as the left wing. You're someone who does not watch Fox, right? You don't need to be someone who does watch another thing. You simply have to be someone who doesn't watch Fox. So it's, it's again, an interesting thing about how there's in-groups and out-groups, and simply having identifiers for that can be sufficient to enable, it can draw from disinformation, and it can enable disinformation and misinformation going forward. But let's talk about splitting people up, because that is awesome.
Well, can I add on to something about that? Quick story.
No, no.
Yeah.
I'm shutting you down.
No. In the early 90s, a friend of mine and I drove to work together, had lunch, and this was over summer. We were kind of working outside, and during the while we were eating lunch, we listened to Rush Limbaugh. I went the whole summer listening to Rush Limbaugh, laughing the whole time. At the end of the summer, I was, talking to him. I was like, it sucks. I'm not going to listen to this because you have it on, but I'm not going to listen to this. And I go, and that's straight comedy. That's cool that they do this skit on AM radio. And he goes, it's not a skit. This is, and right then I was like, wait, this person really believes all this stuff. And he's like, yes. And it gets back to kind of the old thing about like Howard Stern. Why do you listen to him? Because I want to hear what he says. Why do the people who hate him listen to him? Because they want to hear what he says. And what it really hit me is there was a long time ago, there was a possibility that someone that could have seen what was happening stopped it early, but we didn't. We just let everything go, and it just kept creeping up until now. Combating it is very hard, and we have to be on the lookout for the next Rush Limbaugh, left or right. We cannot allow things like that.
There's Gregor said just in the chat, there's a lot of left-wing media outlets. Yeah, I mean, there's disinformation there too. They're just kind of harder to get thick. And the other thing is, it's not just that show. I mean, part of this is Sinclair buying up a lot of outlets. I spent last year driving all the way across America, listening to radio stations, and just hearing the same anti-left-wing stuff all over the country. It was really, really hard to find. I found one farm radio station in almost every state. I missed North Dakota. Sorry, North Dakota, but I did try to sample everywhere. So there's a sense that there just isn't the variety available in a lot of places. People are getting these single channels.
It's similar with the death of local news and the growth of national news. People, like with the death of the local newspaper, basically all the information that's left is the stuff that comes from, like Washington, New York, LA, these or Chicago, like these major cities that can actually support a local newsroom that happens to be big enough to also be national. And as a result, there isn't the local coverage that is actually necessary for a functioning society. Like if you don't know what's going on locally, you don't really know what's actually going on in the places that affect you. So
and that's actually one of the interesting deserts. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So there was some interesting work on pink slime sites. So it was local labs. So there were a set of right-wing biased local, in quotes, news sites set up all over the country, all over the US. Actually, they set up news sites. They set up sites per state. They set up sites for specific topics, including health. They set up some sites in different countries as well, but they were basically fake sites. They looked, if you didn't know, like a local site, and they just looked like a little local paper, but it was all syndicated, generated text, linked across to all of the other sites they owned. Plus, every so often there was a human putting in stuff which was either borderline or had some disinformation in it. And it was basically astroturfing on this massive scale. And when I talk about going into information vacuums, that's one of the things that was done, will be done. So yeah, it's an issue.
That's interesting, because the other thing is during 2016, during the US campaign, the fake news that ended up becoming a catchword was primarily these sort of little WordPress sites that got set up as, like, like the Dallas Underground Chronicle, or like the Denver Mile High, Gazette. And, like like they were all these small, like they appeared to be small local news sites. And, they weren't, because there was actually no newspaper there. But the visual trappings to make it look like a news site are, trivial to create. And once that's done, it was easy to impersonate local news, because like local news carries things that isn't on the national news. We know that. So it is possible to believe that some local story hasn't been picked up elsewhere. So it helped the credibility there in appearing to be from a local news site. So yeah, like that, like local news is very interesting. And
but we've talked about this before. I mean, you can't, or I would say a great disinformation campaign has to bring in that local, yes, you can, yes, people will listen a little bit to stars and the president, whatever, but the biggest impact is making it appear that it is your neighbor, your postman, your preacher, your whatever, that is on board with this story or is relaying the story to you. It's so important to get that intimate connection to make this stuff work.
We're starting to see flyers again now. So we're starting to see physical flyers being put out, which is interesting. Haven't seen that for a bit.
Wow. I guess that's good for the local print communities, businesses, and kids who need jobs. I hope they're wearing masks when they go out and staying 6 feet away from each other and they're distributing. Damn, where were we? Something about local news. Oh, no. We were going to talk about splitting up groups, because this is the cool stuff. So like basically, because I've done a huge amount of research on this, like one of the important things about humans is that we have tribal identities or clans. Like we like to be part of groups. That's primarily how we identify. But people also have multiple identities. So you might be like, I'm a male, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a Cubs fan, I'm a Chicagoan, I'm ex-U Chicago. There's a lot of different things that can be tribal identities, but depending on where you are, you'll have a different salient identity. You'll have a different identity that sort of comes up and dominates. So, when you're at home, probably your, being a graduate of Chicago University is not your primary identity. Whereas if you go to your reunion, it would be. And if you're, watching a football, whatever, baseball, what did Cubs do? If you're watching a sports ball, if you're watching sports ball, then your Cubs fan identity might become your salient identity. And here, the thing that I want to get across is that because people have a huge number of these identities, an effective campaign can pick and isolate an identity that creates a tribal group that people have, and it can amplify that and create a salient identity, an important tribal identity out of that. And then essentially the most important thing to understand about tribal identities is not so much, we are Cubs fans. It's mostly that we are not fans of those other guys. And a huge amount of what defines tribal is the us versus them. So you end up with this great ability to fracture social groups if you can find at least 2 tribal groups within that larger social group, and reinforce one identity. So
we had a really interesting thing back in 2016. So I was tracking with a Canadian disinformation. So we were pretty early on looking at disinformation coming through. And we watched what we think was the Russians repurpose American identity campaigns and put them straight into Canada as right-wing identity campaigns, but without actually bothering to change all of the American identity markers. So it was hilarious. It's like eagles and God and country and all the rest of it. But it seemed to work. I mean, they adapted after a while, but it was just like, how the hell did this work? Somehow it did. Somehow the messaging was like more stronger than the hilariousness of the hell, wrong country, dudes.
Enough repetition and it beats a person down.
Yeah, and the other thing is if a lot of messaging depends on how receptive people are. So if you're if you're neo-Nazi curious, then a neo-Nazi message, even if it's spelled with English spelling instead of American spelling, will resonate with you more than if you're somewhat skeptical of the neo-Nazi messaging in general. Then you'll notice things like, not only is this a completely garbage idea, they don't even spell right.
I try so hard not to call that pile curious.
Guys, let me ask Matt something real quick. Matt, we're on till 1:15? Because I have seen a few questions and I want to make sure that we get some.
Oh.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Well, as I was going to say, if there's questions, then Matt, if you can read them out.
Yeah, no worries. I actually had a question before. You say you collected a bunch of narratives and you're focusing on narratives mainly because there's too much information out there. Regarding the pandemic now, around how many narratives have you been identified?
Oh God, I mean, there are dozens of narratives at the moment going on around COVID. Let me look at one list. So the list coming out of the Carnegie Foundation has 163 narratives. Give you an idea of that. Coming out of EU versus Disinfo.
Maybe give some example narratives as well.
Oh,
I mean, is WHO one of the narrative, or?
WHO has a narrative list as well, so their narrative is a dozen or more.
Yeah. Some narratives are like that the coronavirus is a bioweapon.
Yeah.
And then variations are it's a Chinese bioweapon, it's a CIA bioweapon, it's a Russian bioweapon.
It's an American bioweapon.
I like the Bill Gates theory that he started.
Yeah, it's just to promote the 7 factories that he's throwing up to work on.
Interesting.
This is why we talk about campaigns with incidents underneath, because some of these are just up and down very quickly. So, for instance, the one about Stafford Act being implemented. That happened about 3 weeks ago, and it just turned up, disappeared. Everyone went on under stay-at-home, and it just wasn't useful anymore. Although we have seen flyers yesterday about those, so someone's trying to revive it a little. Just reuse, and some are going to last longer. So all the ones about lockdown, they're done and gone. That's happened. So it's playing on people's fears at the time. So
Someone
Oh,
in
yeah,
the chat
there's
is mentioning 5G also. Like two people actually mentioned like the 5G narrative because that one I didn't see.
Yeah.
Is it like a new one or is it something that started with Huawei, for instance?
Oh, 5G has been going on forever.
Yeah.
I mean, the UK at the moment has managed to wrap 5G with coronavirus with anti-China. So there's a whole bunch of interesting narratives going on there around China is bad, therefore 5G is part of China, therefore 5G is bad, therefore let's burn some towers.
Yeah, and that's part of tribal identity as well, because it's got to, you know, we're scared. What's a good us versus them, and what's something we can do that's also kind of fun. And burning stuff is kind of fun, and you know, we are not China, so that's and you know, again, the UK happens to be pretty good on identity politics. Taking Brexit, for example, you know, and the cricket test and all these other like if there's ever been a country that knows how to create tribal groups,
Sorry,
it's the English.
we done some very bad things.
Yeah.
Steve asked about how we trace back the origin of a narrative. So I guess that's probably worth talking about as well. So
Yes, go for it.
yeah, I mean, you have generally, I mean, you have the top end and the bottom end. So we have something called the pyramid, which is at the top we have those campaigns, and we have the incidents within the campaign, and those incidents sit on narratives. The narratives sit on the artifacts, the messages, the users, so and the images, whatever other things we actually see online. So we'll see them. We'll see things starting to bubble up. There are a whole bunch of really useful sites for looking for those things bubbling up. And as you see phrases, words starting to come through, you start tracking back those phrases, words. You look at botnets that are known, look at what they're talking about. You look at connected actors, the ones that are starting to talk, and you track back in time. You track back across platforms. You can't do exact phrase matching as much anymore because those damn smart machine learning people get in the way. So you can do things like we were doing some latent Dirichlet analysis over the weekend, looking at what the clusters of topics were, which isn't, you're not grouping by words, you're now grouping by which sets of messages are most connected to each other, and then looking at the words with a nose. And a lot of it is just really careful tracking. You're doing very, very similar things to OSINT. It's forensics. It's a combination of applying some algorithms and doing some detailed forensics. Okay, back to you, G.
Well, I was going to say, did you want to speak about Amit briefly? Like,
yeah, definitely, for tools
like
and frameworks.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, because this isn't just like sort of hand wavy stuff. SJ and Pablo, one of our colleagues who's not here, they put in considerable time to build a framework, and
you're my life, dude. So yeah, we spotted this a lot ahead of time. So a couple of years back, I started talking. You'll have seen me at a couple of conferences, maybe. Hey, Dragos, talking about the way that you can apply information security principles to misinformation, disinformation campaigns. And one of the things that we knew was needed was a way to share information rapidly about incidents as they emerge. So we started looking at frameworks, description frameworks. We looked for existing misinformation description frameworks, didn't find a lot. Department of Justice had something useful, but we looked at advertising frameworks, we looked at PSYOPs, we looked at all the military stuff that existed, and we looked at InfoSec frameworks, and we looked at cyclical ones, we looked at the stage-based ones, the kill chains, and we came up with a kill chain for disinformation called Amit. We deliberately made it look very similar to the attack framework. And it's so similar that now MITRE has taken it off our hands and going to start managing it for us, which is yay, cool. And we now have a 12-stage model. So when we see an incident emerge, we're looking from the strategic planning level. So it starts with strategic planning, objective planning, through to a whole bunch of preparation steps where you're developing the people you need, you're planning your useful idiots, you're developing those fake accounts, you're developing the networks you need to push information through, you're developing the content you need to put on it. You're working out which channels you're putting it through, you're doing some micro-targeting if you want adverts, and then you start putting it out. You start doing fast leaks through things like journalists, you're doing baiting, you're putting out through botnets, you're putting it out en masse, and you've got the physical stuff where you're pushing to the physical. The leaflets are one, things like t-shirts are another one, but there's also things like you can use disinformation to create physical effects. Like we've seen two opposing groups being given meeting protest places, times and places at the same place and time, to see if you could create a in real person conflict. And then you're seeing if you can keep this running. There's some M&E measure, effectiveness measures at the end, because you're going to, if you're running a long campaign, you want to make the next one better. So basically, that's the model we have of what the bad guys are doing. And we use that model to look at the ways to counter. Underneath each of those, there's a set of techniques that we see are being used. So when we see an incident, we tag the techniques we've seen, we tag the artifacts we see in there, we tag the actors in there. So we have Amit is now sitting in MISP. We've got it in sticks. So we carry it on sticks for threat intelligence. We have it in MISP to share. So we're talking to a few countries about this, who are trialing with us, us being the COGSAP collab. And it's how we make sense and how we track what's going on. So, like I said, it was a year of our lives just getting the frameworks in place so that we could rapidly share, because we saw this coming. We knew that it would reach a point where you couldn't just do this by hand. Okay, G, back to you. I've done the sales pitch.
No, as I was just saying, I was thinking like the two groups meeting up was actually the most successful physical event that those guys managed, but there's a lot of really fascinating stuff about that whole campaign. Like my firm belief is that they because they believed that the color revolutions were CIA events, they believed that the CIA had a capability to, spontaneously create these huge protests, right? That somehow this was a thing that the CIA was able to do, and they wanted to replicate it. Like they wanted to say, we have the same capability that CIA has. We can create large protests. And so they tried multiple times in multiple different ways to get large groups of people to show up. And the closest it came was that one incident in Texas. And that didn't have the result that they were obviously looking for. And I think that they failed to realize that the color protests were not organized by CIA, a couple days in advance. Like they were not, they're not a CIA capability. And Americans are lazy as fuck, right? If you tell them to like, and America is big. So if you want a whole bunch of people that agree with you to go somewhere, the odds of them all being within, easy distance of each other is actually pretty low. Like you could probably find 1,000 people who agree with you in the US, but they're going to be, hundreds of miles from each other. and they're not going to want to travel, unless they're really, really dedicated, like Star Trek fans or something. They're not going to invest that much time and effort to show up somewhere. My favorite anecdote, by the way, out of 2016 is how basically every physical event was tracked down to at least one local news story, except in Florida. One of the things that the Russians had done was they had paid people via Fiverr to have a truck with a cage in the back and someone dressed as Hillary in an orange jumpsuit, right? Like locked up in the back of this cage in a truck. And they couldn't figure out which of 3 trucks with cages and Hillary's in orange jumpsuits was the one that was organized by the Russians and which of the other 2 were organized by locals. And I think that says a lot about just how much othering has been done about the disinformation campaign and the misinformation campaigns that were happening, where a lot gets blamed on Russia. But if you look at this, like they can't even tell which of these, anti-Hillary locker up props was the Russian one and which of the other, and which was indigenous. There's a huge amount that was actually local, and it's very, very hard to blame it on an external group, even though it's much, it feels better to do that than to admit that, the disinformation is coming from inside the house. So that was the comment I had on that, because you reminded me of the funny thing. Cool. I did.
I have a quick question, actually, regarding the framework and the tools. Because like we talk a lot about the disinformation and misinformation, but also online there's something I haven't seen like people covering much is more regarding like radicalization and like online extremism. Like how would that register under like disinformation and misinformation? Because even if you look at the data, I will take like Facebook and Twitter as an example, because so far they're the only one releasing like official like reports. Obviously, like Facebook is not releasing much details. Twitter is doing a bit of effort without giving much context, but for like radicalization, is like AMIT something that could be applied? And have you seen like people doing work around it?
We certainly looked at radicalization as part of the development of AMIT, and we think you can. We included sales funnels. So it turns out the sales funnels are actually really useful for modeling radicalization. You have the same, people become aware, people become part of, then become transmitters of an idea. Whether that idea is this product is wonderful or this right-wing idea is great. So yeah, I mean, we built it so it could be used for that. And we're linking up with the group that's handling some radicalization too. So we'll see. We'll give us a week, see how we're doing.
Okay.
Things are moving fast right now. We were planning to spend this year building up the tool chain, and we're now developing as we use.
Yeah, different roadmap.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, COVID.
On the plus side, everyone's got more time at home, so
Oh yeah.
we can focus on that.
Well, or less time if you have kids, like.
Well, if you don't have kids and you're in the CTI league and you want to come play in disinformation, I'm there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to segue very badly, because we were talking about physical things. I want to bring up the sort of the power plays, like the geopolitical soft power moves that are going on now with COVID, because they're very interesting, and I'm not seeing analysis on them in the media. It's just more of a flat reporting of what's going on. So here I'm talking about things like Russia sending military trucks into Italy to help disinfect. China donating PPE and medical equipment to well, initially it was Italy, but like I think the biggest one was when Cuomo came out and literally said, like, thank you to Jack Ma and Consul Wong and so on for helping us get masks and PPE. And these things where Russia and China are using aid to appear benevolent, and I mean, yes, they are in at least one way being benevolent, but it's not pure altruism. It's this sort of soft power play is the sort of thing that you would expect from the US, right? Like when the Ebola crisis happened, there wasn't, Russia sending military trucks to disinfect African villages and China sending plane loads of supplies. It was the US that did that. And now the US is literally having China send supplies directly to, the states, like individual states. And to me, it's absolutely amazing that these countries are able to exercise soft power inside the US. Does anyone have any comments?
Exactly. If there's a vacuum now, and somebody is going to fill it.
I mean, we're looking at a world. I mean, but what I do in the rest of my time is things like map what happens if all the borders closed and everyone stops sending food to each other. Who's suddenly going to be starving? And we're about to hit a world where COVID-19 is going to hit some countries a lot worse than others. If you think about it, 50% or 20% means 10% population being not to put a finer point on it, the projections for Haiti are 800,000 dead out of 11 million. And repeat that around the world. And you've got yourself a Cold War style race between countries to gain ground and support. And that's already happening, but it's happening in places we would never have dreamed. No, Italy for God's. NATO country, Europe, what the hell?
Okay, let's be fair. So First World War, Italy was with the British, right? Second World War, they were with the Germans. So Third World War, it's fair enough that they should be with the Russians this time.
Oh, don't.
I mean, we had them the other two world wars. We've done our bit. Someone else is stuck with them now.
And the other day, I yes, like Haiti will be bad. We talk about these countries that are going to be hit. I keep waiting for the ball to drop in India. And
India's looked very much inside so far, but yeah, I mean it's a lot of displaced people. I mean, a lot of food that didn't make it. Yeah,
a large population on top of each other, bad healthcare, and then if that happens, talk about being able to shift world power. I mean, Russia or China being right there and being able to not just really influence places with their soft power. It can be scary.
Not just soft power. I mean, at some point we'll probably end up in proxy wars.
Well,
yeah. And one of the scary things about the dynamic between India and China is that the Indians do, like, basically their entire espionage effort has been focused on Pakistan and things like that, and not on China. So they do not actually know what Chinese thinking is. They don't have insights from human sources that say, okay, yes, they're doing the saber rattling, but really, you know, it's just for the internal market, you can ignore it.
Right.
They don't have those sources, so they don't have that insight. So they're kind of flying blind. They're in the same bucket as, you know, the rest of the public. So that has a very, very bad potential to go very badly wrong, simply because they lack visibility. I'm not sure the other way around. I think China probably has quite good visibility on India. At least, you know, like they've definitely hacked the shit out of them.
I've been pretty impressed by their intelligence gathering, yeah. But
oh yeah,
some of this is, you know, some countries play the long game much, much longer than others.
But some countries are really good on the 24-hour cycle, you know. Like the US, they're excellent on that immediate 24-hour, can't see past, you know.
Well, you know, the Brits have a saying, a week is a long time in politics. You know, it's depends on your scales, depends on your plans, depends on what you actually want to do geopolitically, and also on, you know, whether geopolitics is going to be the same. No, it's been territory based. Now is it moving to human based, personhood based?
Right.
Well, you've got geopolitics, you've got power, you've got money, the usual motivations. So,
yeah,
not sure.
I think it depends on where you look. You know, like it varies by country, and it also varies by topic. So it depends, and you know, it varies by time. So when elections come up, obviously political disinformation campaigns ramp up a lot more than sort of in a lull when there's opportunities for other things.
But entrepreneurs are going to sit on back of it. So they're going to make money either running campaigns for other people or running their own sites. Anti-vax, I mean, they make a lot of money. So, you know, you've got advertising, you've got merchandise, you've got, yeah. So there's a suspicion that Trump has a financial interest, which is why he keeps pushing it. Like that does appear to be true in a literal sense, but I support the theory that someone else put out that he's literally just looking for a miracle cure to make this be over. Like it's not so much that he expects to make money out of it. He just wants something to make this go away because he's got nothing else that he can figure out what to do. So I think there's that. The other thing is that it came from, again, an information vacuum where basically in China they were trying literally everything, and you know, these weren't randomized trials. These were people who were desperate, and they'd say, okay, well, we gave a whole bunch of different drugs to a bunch of different people and some of them survived. Here are the things that we gave to people, and people sort of latched onto different ones. I mean, here in Thailand, for a while, they were saying that these HIV cocktail drugs were effective. And it wasn't necessarily that HIV cocktail drugs are effective. It's just they were throwing, you know, spaghetti at the wall. This was something that they tried and the person recovered. So, you know, that's one data point. So I'm not sure it's driven by finances so much as it is by fear.
Like people are just desperate for something that will make this go away quickly. That's my suspicion.
And I do want to point out, I think it was either this morning or yesterday, that as much as he's pushing that, a doctor, I believe it is at the Mayo Clinic, sorry if I don't remember exactly correctly, was like, hey, but don't forget there are side effects to this drug. We need to be talking about that just as much. And it is amazing how it seemed like that story went and then just got shut down.
So I think we're on to our last points, aren't we, Matt?
Yep.
So, yeah. So yeah, which mentioned the point of across the kill chain.
Oh, yeah. I mean, basically that it's not just about taking down the bots. We have the kill chain and we're building out counters across the whole of the kill chain. It's a lot more that we can actually do about disinformation campaigns than you think.
And regarding that point, you know, because and I guess also one of the problem with that, the reason people think it's just like bots and Facebook and Twitter is also because they are the only one publishing some like reports. I mean, if we can call them reports, even like Twitter recently for this month and last month, they just posted some tweets. They are not even writing blog posts anymore, which is a bit surprising. Do you think like even like those companies are like even prepared internally, because it seems like there is also some blind spots if it's non-English content also. Like it seems like there is a huge focus on English content, and it sounds like even their team, well, I'm gonna take like Twitter and Facebook as example again for like companies, because they're the only one trying to do stuff, but even with them it sounds like their team are very small and they don't even have the I don't know, like people speaking like more language than English. I remember like Grugq, like a few years back when we talked about Myanmar, it was a big problem for Facebook. And I think if I recall correctly, one of the main problem is that if it was not in English, a bit like the French police when there's terrorist attack, if it's not written in French, like people get lost. Like, do you see any like strategy like from a social media company or even like news company about like being able to analyze non-English content? Because obviously data and aggregation is very important because that allows us to make like some proper percentage on different things and statistics. But what about non-English content for that point?
It's not just non-English. It's also you have to localize. So I was working at GDI last year, and I was looking at disinformation in Kenya. I used to be a data director for a Kenyan company, so I had some idea of the data landscape there. But if you don't have people who live there, they can't tell you what the disinformation is. They can't tell you what is normal information there. Yeah. So it becomes a lot harder if you don't have local people. Yeah. I mean, WhatsApp, I guess, is a good example because a lot of like local news get shared on WhatsApp, and the best that Facebook was able to do is to limit like the number of time you can forward a message, and they're doing that only because of the pandemic, and it took them I don't know many years, because we know that was a problem. They've done that in elections in the South American countries before. It's not. And
they also did that. Sorry. Yeah, and they also did that in India.
So it's country specific?
Yeah, like the Indian one they did because there were like race riots and people were getting killed. So like that became important because they didn't want to be held liable for people dying, which incidentally is going to happen to Fox News because of all the disinformation they put out about COVID. There's been at least one person who has died who believed that the virus was a hoax. So Fox is lawyering up, and they're kind of scared of being sued for causing people to die because they were lying, which I think is kind of interesting. But in terms of language, I can say that basically the only thing I've seen aside from English is a lot of these places hired Russian speakers because they figured that having Russian speakers would be good for understanding what was happening with, IRA and Russian-based disinformation campaigns. And then they found out that it's not really that useful. I mean, like it's great, but that's not where most of the disinformation comes from. So I've seen that there are now a fair number of these people looking at disinformation campaigns in that are in the Russian language. But to be fair, literally everywhere that speaks Russian as at least a second language, they're pretty comfortable handling disinformation. They have a fairly long history of dealing with disinformation. They're not looking for Americans to tell them that there's a bunch of Twitter bots promoting something. These people live through Pravda. They're good.
Yeah, I also I don't think we've seen much online report about India disinformation campaigns, like Twitter datasets that are like country specific. That they never release once about India.
If you want India, Run Rage is a person to track.
Sorry?
If you want India disinformation, Run Rage is a good person to track.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, there is a bunch of them that are active. I'm just surprised, and so that social media companies are not doing anything for that.
So I actually want to stop us there for a second, because I want to pull us back on topic that it isn't Facebook, it isn't Twitter. That's the important stuff. I
of course.
will always go back that it is the local things that are most important. And I saw somebody post in there, critical thinking for the win. Critical thinking is important. But guess what? A good PSYOPer, which I used to be PSYOP, so I still call it PSYOP, can take your intelligence and use it against you. You can be brilliant, and I can still trick you. So don't, and part of it is that overconfidence that I'm too smart to fall for something, right? So emotion controls everything. And at the local level, that's where you get really emotional. Yes, at the top level you do, but when you're with your people, when you're with your tribe, that's when you're really emotional, and you allow your intelligence to be subverted a bit.
Yeah, an excellent example of that is that there is a Russian-based disinformation group that puts out these propaganda videos on Twitter, and I hate to go back to social media when we're talking about this is not social media, but these propaganda videos are targeted at groups and tribes, and okay, like there's now this, which is not the Russian one, and they've created a sort of a visual format. There's a very stark white, black, yellow. That's their visual thing. And then there's like, I think the Russian one is like, this is now. It's very, very similar. It's designed to confuse people looking at it. They even use the same visual cues, but they put out.
I think they use the same music.
Yeah, like it looks very, very similar. Anyway, some of those videos have ripped through the InfoSec Twitter community, and we consider ourselves fairly smart. But when something shows up and you watch it and it just emotionally grabs you with basically a point of view that you agree with, right? Like the one I was thinking of was a police brutality thing, and it got huge traction. And afterwards, I went through and I analyzed it, and I was like, oh my God, this is so flimsy and terrible. I can't imagine that anyone ever fell for it, but all of us did. So that's the thing. It's not about being smart. All of this stuff is emotional, and I'm getting told I have to shut up.
And then, I mean, no, but we're gonna have to wrap up. I guess soon. Like, if there is any like conclusion points or anything like you want to close on. No, I guess now is the time. I don't see more questions from the chat either.
Yeah, just the same stuff we started out with. It's that like social media is a distribution channel. It's not the end all and be all of disinformation. All of this anti-disinformation stuff that's going on, a lot of it that's just focused on taking down bots and things like that. It's missing the important stuff, and you can learn more about the important stuff by looking at Amit. And I believe we're putting out a counters document at some point. And you'll see that it's, you know, like there's a lot of stages in that kill chain that are much more effective. And it would be good to go after those, not the final end target, just the messaging bit. So yeah, wrapping up, that's it, you know, like disinformation is everywhere, and
misinformation
not limited to social media.
Cool. Well, thanks to all of you, and thanks for your time. We're getting some positive feedback in the chat, so I'm sure it was really informative for a lot of people. It's going to be recorded, so that's good. Any other point you want to close on, Brian, Sarah?
No, good.
No.
I'm good.
Okay, perfect. Well,
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for joining us today. And
yeah, thanks for having us, Matt.
Yeah, no worries. Okay.
Bye.